Words have consequences we can't always predict. Woohyuk Hoseo learned that lesson in the most devastating way possible, watching the woman he'd called just a tool bleeding out on a hospital gurney after she'd taken a bullet meant for his mother. It had started 6 months earlier in Seattle, when Woohyuk had hired Dionne Morgan as his mother's personal caregiver. His mother, Mrs. Hoseo, was 73 years old, recovering from a stroke that had left her partially paralyzed and requiring round-the-clock assistance with daily activities. Woohyuk ran a tech company, Hoseo Innovations, a software development firm worth approximately $2 billion that he'd built from nothing over 15 years. He was brilliant, driven, absolutely ruthless in business dealings, and completely devoted to his mother despite having no time to care for her personally. So he'd hired professional caregivers. 3 of them had quit within the first 2 months because Mrs. Hoseo was demanding, often confused from the stroke's cognitive effects, and required patience that most people couldn't sustain. Dionne was the 4th caregiver the agency had sent. She was a registered nurse with extensive experience in post-stroke rehabilitation, came highly recommended, and according to her file was exceptionally patient with difficult patients. Woohyuk had interviewed her briefly before approving the hire. "My mother is very important to me. Taking care of her is not a job you can be casual about. I expect professional competence, complete dedication, and total discretion about our family's private affairs. Can you provide that?" "Yes, Mr. Hoseo. I have 10 years of experience in home healthcare, specialized training in stroke rehabilitation, and excellent references from previous clients. I understand that caring for your mother is serious responsibility and I'm committed to providing the highest quality care." "Good. You'll work 6 days per week, 12-hour shifts. You'll be compensated well, substantially above standard caregiver rates because I expect exceptional service. But understand that you're here to do a job. Nothing more. You're not family, you're not a friend. You're a professional providing a service I'm paying for. Keep that boundary clear." "I understand, Mr. Hoseo. Professional boundaries are important and I'm comfortable maintaining them." That had been their entire interaction before Dionne started work. Woohyuk had treated the hiring like any other business transaction: identify need, find qualified contractor, establish clear expectations, maintain professional distance. What he hadn't anticipated was how quickly his mother would become attached to Dionne. Mrs. Hoseo was lonely. Her husband had died 5 years ago, her friends from Korea had mostly passed away or returned to Seoul, and her only child was too busy running a multi-billion-dollar company to spend significant time with her. The stroke had isolated her further, she struggled with speech, had difficulty with mobility, felt embarrassed about needing help with basic tasks. Dionne treated her with unfailing patience and genuine warmth. She learned basic Korean phrases to communicate when Mrs. Hoseo's English failed her. She researched traditional Korean dishes and prepared them exactly how Mrs. Hoseo remembered from her childhood. She spent hours listening to stories about Korea and Mrs. Hoseo's life before immigrating, treating those stories as valuable rather than just tolerating them. Within a month, Mrs. Hoseo was telling Woohyuk that Dionne was like a daughter to her, that she looked forward to Dionne's shifts more than anything else in her week, that Dionne made her feel valued and cared for rather than just managed. Woohyuk appreciated that his mother was happy. But he was also uncomfortable with how attached she was becoming to someone who was, fundamentally, just an employee. "Mother, you need to remember that Dionne is your caregiver. She's paid to take care of you. The relationship isn't personal, it's professional. Don't become too dependent on someone who could leave at any time. She's not just caregiver. She's good person who cares about me. You should appreciate her more instead of treating her like she's just worker. I do appreciate her work. I pay her very well for that work. But she is just a worker. That's the nature of the relationship. You're too cold, Woohyuk. Not everyone is business transaction. Dionne has heart. You should learn from her." Woohyuk dismissed his mother's criticism. He wasn't cold, he was realistic about professional boundaries. Dionne was providing excellent service and being compensated appropriately for that service. Maintaining clear employer-employee boundaries was professional behavior, not coldness. The first serious conflict came 3 months into Dionne's employment. Woohyuk came home late one evening, around 11 p.m. after a business dinner that had run long. Dionne's shift officially ended at 8 p.m., but she was still there, sitting with his mother, watching a Korean drama together and laughing at something on screen. "Why are you still here?" Woohyuk asked. "Your shift ended 3 hours ago. Your mother asked if I could stay and watch the show with her. She was having a good day and I didn't want to cut it short just because my official hours were done. I'll put in for the overtime, I'm tracking my time accurately." "That's not the point. The point is that you're blurring professional boundaries by staying beyond your scheduled hours for social activities rather than just providing necessary care. Mr. Hoseo, your mother is lonely and she enjoys company. Watching television with her for a few extra hours doesn't blur professional boundaries, it's providing emotional support that's part of good caregiving. Emotional support is fine during your scheduled hours. But staying late to watch TV suggests you're not maintaining appropriate professional distance. With respect, I think appropriate professional distance for a caregiver is different than appropriate distance for other professional relationships. Caregiving is inherently personal work. If I maintained complete emotional distance, I'd be a terrible caregiver. You're paid to provide medical care and assistance with daily living activities. Emotional support is secondary to those primary functions. Emotional support is equally important to physical care for patients recovering from strokes. Your mother's mental health and social well-being directly affect her physical recovery. That's basic rehabilitation science. Woohyuk didn't appreciate being lectured about caregiving by his employee. In the future, leave when your shift ends unless there's a medical emergency requiring you to stay late. I don't want you here for social visits outside your scheduled hours. Understood. But I want to note that restricting my time with your mother purely to scheduled hours may negatively impact her emotional well-being and by extension her recovery progress. That's my decision to make. Follow my instructions about your schedule." Dionne left without further argument. But Woohyuk could see she was frustrated with his directive. The second conflict was worse. It happened during a review of Dionne's performance 4 months into her employment. Woohyuk had called her into his home office to discuss her work and to address some concerns. "Your medical care is excellent. My mother's physical recovery has progressed well under your treatment. Her speech is improving, her mobility is better than doctors initially expected. You're clearly competent at the rehabilitation work. Thank you. Your mother has worked very hard on her recovery. She's highly motivated. However, I'm concerned about boundary issues. My mother has become very emotionally dependent on you. She talks about you constantly, she's upset on your days off, she's treating you like family rather than like her caregiver. That's problematic. Mr. Hoseo, your mother is a lonely elderly woman who's lost most of her social connections and who's struggling with the limitations her stroke has created. Of course she's attached to someone who spends 12 hours a day with her providing care and companionship. That attachment is normal and healthy, it's not a boundary problem. It's a problem because you're not permanent. You're an employee who could leave at any time. If you quit or if I terminate your employment, my mother will be devastated. That vulnerability is created by your failure to maintain appropriate professional distance. Every caregiver relationship creates that vulnerability. Patients become attached to people who care for them, that's inherent to the work. The alternative is caregivers who maintain such emotional distance that they provide terrible care because they're not invested in their patients' well-being. Then you need to find a balance between investment and professional distance. What you're doing now is too close, too personal. You need to pull back. I disagree. What I'm doing is providing excellent holistic care that addresses both physical and emotional needs. If you want me to provide worse care by maintaining more emotional distance, I can do that. But I think it would harm your mother's recovery. I want you to remember that you're a tool I'm using to care for my mother. A valuable tool, but still just a tool. You're not her daughter, you're not her friend. You're paid help. Maintain that perspective. Dionne looked at him with an expression that suggested she was re-evaluating everything about this employment. I'm a person, Mr. Hoseo. Not a tool. I'm a registered nurse providing professional care that happens to include emotional support because that's what good caregiving requires. If you can't see the difference between a person providing compassionate care and a tool performing functions, then I think you've lost perspective about what caregiving actually is. You're a person I've hired to perform specific functions. That makes you a tool in the context of this professional relationship. I don't mean that disrespectfully, I'm just being accurate about the nature of our arrangement. It is disrespectful. Calling someone a tool reduces them to object status, suggests they have no value beyond their utility to you. I provide care because I believe in the inherent dignity of every patient, because I think your mother deserves compassion and respect, not just because you're paying me to perform functions. Your motivations are irrelevant to me. What matters is that you perform your job competently while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Can you do that, or do I need to find a different caregiver? I can do my job competently. I'm not sure I can meet your expectation of appropriate boundaries if that means providing care without genuine compassion or emotional investment. But I'll try. After Dionne left his office, Woohyuk felt satisfied that he'd clarified expectations. She needed to understand that their relationship was professional, that she was providing a service, that emotional attachment was problematic. What he didn't realize was that calling her just a tool would be words he'd regret more than anything he'd ever said in his life. The incident that changed everything happened 6 weeks after that conversation. Woohyuk came home from work around 7 p.m., earlier than usual because he had documents to review at home. Dionne's shift would end at 8 p.m. He'd planned to briefly check on his mother, then work in his office. When he walked in, something was immediately wrong. The house was too quiet. Dionne should have been helping his mother with dinner or assisting with her evening routine. Dionne? Mother? No response. Woohyuk walked through the house, growing increasingly concerned. He found them in his mother's bedroom. A man he didn't recognize was holding a gun pointed at Dionne and his mother. The man was young, maybe early 20s, clearly agitated and unstable. Don't move, the man said when Woohyuk entered. I just want money. Give me money and I'll leave. Woohyuk assessed the situation rapidly. Home invasion, probably drug-motivated given the man's appearance and behavior. Dangerous but potentially resolvable if he stayed calm and gave the man what he wanted. I have cash in my office. I'll get it for you. Just stay calm and don't hurt anyone. I'll come with you. These two stay here. If you try anything, I'll come back and shoot them. Woohyuk led the man to his office, pulled $5,000 from his safe, money he kept for emergencies, and handed it over. Here. Take this and leave. No one needs to get hurt. The man took the money, seemed satisfied. He was turning to leave when Mrs. Hoseo appeared in the office doorway. She'd followed them despite instructions to stay in her bedroom. She was confused, the stroke's cognitive effects made it hard for her to process complex situations, and she didn't understand that she was supposed to remain where she was. Woohyuk? What's happening? Who is this man? The intruder panicked. Spun around, pointed the gun at Mrs. Hoseo. I told you to stay put. Why didn't you listen? Dionne had followed Mrs. Hoseo, clearly trying to keep her safe by staying close. When the gun pointed at Mrs. Hoseo, Dionne moved. She threw herself between the gun and Mrs. Hoseo at the exact moment the intruder's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined office space. Dionne went down. The bullet had hit her center mass. Chest wound, immediately bleeding heavily. The intruder ran. Woohyuk barely noticed, his attention was entirely on Dionne, who was on the floor, bleeding, gasping for air. Call 911, she managed to say. Get your mother safe. I'll be okay. Woohyuk called 911 while moving his mother, who was crying and screaming Dionne's name, away from the scene. Gave the emergency operator their address, explained there'd been a shooting, that they needed an ambulance immediately. Then he was on the floor beside Dionne, applying pressure to the wound with his jacket, trying to slow the bleeding while waiting for paramedics. Why did you do that? Why did you jump in front of her? She's my patient. Protecting her is my job. You're just a caregiver. You're not supposed to take bullets for patients. That's not your job. My job is caring for your mother. That includes keeping her safe. Even from bullets. You called her a tool, his mother sobbed from where she was sitting against the wall. You told her she was just tool. But she saved my life. She's not tool, she's hero. Woohyuk's own words echoed in his head. You're just a tool I'm using to care for my mother. A valuable tool, but still just a tool. He'd said that to the woman who was now bleeding on his office floor because she'd protected his mother with her own body. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They took over care, stabilized Dionne enough for transport, loaded her onto a gurney. Woohyuk rode in the ambulance with her, holding her hand while paramedics worked. Stay with me. Please stay with me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said. You're not a tool. You're extraordinary. Please don't die. Dionne was barely conscious. Tell your mother. I'm proud of her progress. She's worked so hard. Then she was unconscious. The paramedics were calling out vital signs, talking about blood pressure dropping, about the hospital needing to be ready for emergency surgery. At the hospital, they took Dionne directly to surgery. Woohyuk was left in the surgical waiting area with his mother, who couldn't stop crying. She saved my life. Dionne saved my life. You have to save hers. Please. Woohyuk had never felt so helpless. He ran a $2 billion company, could solve complex business problems, could negotiate deals worth hundreds of millions. But he couldn't do anything to help the woman who'd taken a bullet for his mother. All he could do was wait. And remember every time he dismissed Dionne as just an employee, just a tool, just someone providing a service he was paying for. He'd been so wrong. She wasn't just anything. She was someone who genuinely cared about his mother enough to die protecting her. Someone who'd provided care with real compassion despite being told she was just a tool performing functions. Hours passed. The surgery took 4 hours, removing the bullet, repairing damage to Dionne's lung and chest cavity, stabilizing her enough that she might survive. When the surgeon finally emerged, Woohyuk stood immediately. How is she? She's alive. Critical but stable. The next 48 hours will determine whether she survives without major complications. She lost a lot of blood, the bullet damaged her left lung significantly, but we've repaired what we can. She's young and healthy, which works in her favor. But it's too early to know if she'll make a full recovery. Can I see her? She's in ICU, still unconscious from surgery. You can see her briefly, but she won't be aware of your presence. Woohyuk went to the ICU, stood beside Dionne's bed, looked at the woman who'd saved his mother's life while connected to machines monitoring her fragile vital signs. He cried. For the first time since his father had died 10 years ago, Woohyuk cried, not professional grief, not controlled sorrow, but complete breakdown sobbing because this woman who he'd called just a tool had almost died saving someone she cared about despite being told she should maintain emotional distance. I'm sorry, he said even though she couldn't hear him. I'm sorry for every dismissive thing I said. I'm sorry for treating you like you were just an employee when you were actually caring for my mother with genuine compassion. I'm sorry for not seeing how extraordinary you were until you were bleeding in front of me. Please survive this. Please. Subscribe to see what happens when dismissive words become devastating regret and a tool proves to be a hero whose sacrifice transforms someone who thought professional relationships could remain emotionally distant. Comment where you're watching from, and tell me, have you ever regretted words you said before understanding their full impact? This story is just beginning. Dionne remained in critical condition for 3 days. Woohyuk stayed at the hospital for all of it, only leaving briefly to shower and change clothes at his mother's insistence. He worked remotely from the ICU waiting area, taking calls and attending virtual meetings while monitoring updates about Dionne's condition. His mother stayed with him, despite her own difficulty with mobility and fatigue, refusing to leave until she knew Dionne would survive. This is my fault, Mrs. Hoseo said repeatedly. I didn't listen. I left bedroom when they told me to stay. If I had listened, that man wouldn't have pointed gun at me. Dionne wouldn't have been shot. It's not your fault, mother. Your cognitive difficulties from the stroke made it hard to process the situation. You didn't intentionally create danger. But Dionne got hurt saving me. She might die because I was confused. She might die because she chose to protect you. That was her choice. Don't blame yourself for her heroism. On the third day, Dionne woke up. Woohyuk was in her ICU room when it happened. He'd been maintaining a vigil by her bedside whenever the hospital allowed visitors, which was limited, but he'd negotiated extended access by claiming to be family. Her eyes opened. She looked confused, disoriented by the tubes and machines and the hospital environment. Mr. Hoseo? What happened? You were shot. Protecting my mother. You've been in critical condition for 3 days. But you're going to be okay. The doctors think you'll recover fully if you avoid complications. Your mother, is she safe? She's safe. Thanks to you. She's here at the hospital. She's been here the entire time waiting for you to wake up. She wants to see you. I need to see her. I need to know she's okay. I'll bring her in. But first, I need to say something. Dionne looked at him, waiting. I'm sorry. For everything I said about you being just a tool, about you maintaining professional distance, about dismissing the care you were providing as just a job you were paid to do. You're not a tool. You're an extraordinary person who genuinely cared about my mother enough to risk your life to protect her. I was wrong about everything and I'm sorry. Mr. Hoseo. Woohyuk. Please call me Woohyuk. We're not employer and employee right now. We're two people processing the fact that you almost died, and I'm trying to apologize for being an asshole before I understood how wrong I was. You were maintaining professional boundaries. That's appropriate for employer-employee relationships. I was being cold and dismissive under the guise of professionalism. There's a difference. You tried to tell me that caregiving requires emotional investment, that maintaining complete distance makes you a terrible caregiver. I didn't listen because I was too focused on business relationship frameworks. I should have listened. I understand why you wanted boundaries. Your mother was becoming very attached to me. You were worried about what would happen if I left. That's legitimate concern. It is a legitimate concern. But the solution isn't demanding that you provide care without emotional investment. The solution is appreciating that you were willing to care so deeply despite knowing the relationship was temporary. That's valuable, not problematic. Mrs. Hoseo appeared at the ICU door, supported by a nurse. When she saw Dionne was awake, she burst into tears. Dionne. You're alive. Thank God you're alive. She moved to the bedside as quickly as her limited mobility allowed. Grabbed Dionne's hand, crying openly. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you got hurt. You saved my life. You're a hero. I'm glad you're safe, Mrs. Hoseo. That's all that matters. You matter. You matter so much. You're not tool like my son said. You're not just worker. You're family. Your daughter I never had. I love you. Dionne cried too, both from the emotion and from the pain of her injuries. I love you too. You're not just patient to me. You never were. You're someone I genuinely care about. Woohyuk watched this exchange, watched his mother and his employee expressing genuine love for each other, and felt the full weight of how badly he'd misjudged the relationship. Over the following weeks, while Dionne recovered in the hospital and then in a rehabilitation facility, Woohyuk paid all her medical expenses. Not because he was legally obligated, the shooting had occurred during her employment so workers' compensation covered most costs. But because he felt responsible for having created an environment where she felt she had to prove her dedication by taking a bullet. He also continued paying her full salary even though she wasn't working, covered all her rehabilitation costs, and arranged for the best possible care during her recovery. You don't have to do this, Dionne told him during one of his daily visits to the rehabilitation facility. Workers' compensation is covering my medical expenses. You're not obligated to provide additional support. I'm not doing this because of legal obligation. I'm doing it because you were hurt protecting my mother, Because I want to ensure your recovery is supported fully, and because I'm trying to make up for how I treated you before the shooting. You treated me professionally. That wasn't wrong. I treated you dismissively. I reduced you to function you performed rather than recognizing you as a person providing care with genuine compassion. That was wrong and I'm trying to correct it now. How am I supposed to return to work after this? After I crossed the line from caregiver to someone who took a bullet for a patient? That's not professional boundary, that's complete boundary dissolution. You're not returning to work as my employee. When you're fully recovered, I'd like you to consider something different. What? I'd like you to be my mother's companion. Not her caregiver in the professional sense, but her friend and support person. I'll pay you the same compensation, but the relationship would be explicitly personal rather than professional. My mother loves you. You clearly love her. The professional framework was creating artificial constraints on a relationship that's actually more like family than like employment. That's a very unusual arrangement. I'm aware. But I think it's more honest than continuing to pretend you're just an employee when you're clearly much more to my mother. What about you? How do you feel about me becoming your mother's companion instead of her professional caregiver? I feel grateful. Grateful that my mother has someone who cares about her genuinely, who's willing to provide support and companionship without being bound by professional constraints. And I feel like I owe you an apology that goes beyond just words. I called you a tool. You proved you're a hero. That deserves acknowledgement and relationship that honors your actual role in my mother's life. Dionne agreed to the new arrangement. When she'd recovered sufficiently to leave rehabilitation, about 3 months after the shooting, she returned to Mrs. Hoseo's home not as a caregiver but as a companion and friend. The dynamic was completely different. There were no scheduled hours, no professional boundaries about emotional investment, no employer-employee framework constraining their interactions. Dionne spent time with Mrs. Hoseo because she wanted to, because they enjoyed each other's company, because their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship. Woohyuk watched this development with complicated emotions. He was glad his mother had meaningful companionship. He was grateful Dionne had survived and was willing to maintain relationship with his family after being shot. But he was also developing feelings for Dionne that went far beyond just gratitude or professional appreciation. She was extraordinary. She'd proven that through her heroism, but also through how she'd handled the aftermath. No resentment about being shot, no demands for compensation beyond what Woohyuk offered voluntarily, just gracious acceptance of the new arrangement and continued genuine care for his mother. And she was beautiful in ways Woohyuk hadn't let himself notice when she was his employee. Seeing her laugh with his mother, seeing her move through the house with growing comfort as she recovered from her injuries, seeing her as a person rather than as a function. All of that made him recognize that his attraction was substantial and growing. The question was whether Dionne could ever develop feelings for someone who'd called her just a tool before she'd saved his mother's life. 6 months after the shooting, Woohyuk's mother confronted him about his feelings for Dionne. They were having dinner together, Dionne was there too, the three of them eating the Korean food she'd learned to prepare exactly how Mrs. Hoseo preferred it. After Dionne left to clean up the kitchen despite Mrs. Hoseo's protests that she should relax, Mrs. Hoseo looked at her son directly. You have feelings for Dionne. Stop pretending you don't. Mother, that's inappropriate. She's your companion. I hired her to support you, not to date. You didn't hire her to be companion. She became companion because you finally recognized she was never just employee. And now you have feelings but you're too proud to admit it because you said terrible things before you understood who she really was. I apologized for those things. She's forgiven me. That doesn't mean there's potential for romantic relationship. You don't know if there's potential because you haven't asked. You just assume she must hate you for calling her tool. But Dionne is not a petty person. She understands you were wrong and that you've changed. She might be willing to consider relationship if you actually expressed interest instead of just being grateful and guilty. What if she's not interested? What if asking creates awkwardness that damages her relationship with you? What if she is interested and you never find out because you're too cowardly to ask? You run company worth billions. You negotiate deals, you take business risks. But you can't ask one woman if she'd consider dating you? Business risks and personal risks are different. Personal risks matter more. Business failure costs money. Personal failure costs happiness. Ask her. See what she says. Stop being coward. Woohyuk thought about that conversation for days. His mother was right that he had substantial feelings for Dionne. But she was wrong about the cowardice. He wasn't afraid to ask because of potential rejection. He was afraid to ask because he didn't deserve positive response. He'd treated Dionne terribly when she was his employee. He'd dismissed her care as just professional service, had called her a tool, had demanded she maintain emotional distance when emotional investment was what made her exceptional at her work. Why would she want to date someone who'd been that dismissive of her value? But his mother's criticism about cowardice stayed with him. Finally, 2 weeks after that conversation, he asked Dionne to dinner. Just the two of them, explicitly not about his mother, clearly a date if she was willing to consider it that way. I'd like to take you to dinner. Not to discuss my mother's care or to talk about the companion arrangement. Just to spend time together because I've realized I enjoy your company and I'd like to get to know you better outside the context of you supporting my mother. Dionne looked surprised. You're asking me on a date? Yes. If you're comfortable with that. I understand if you're not. I treated you badly when you were working for me. I have no right to expect you to want to date me. But I'm asking anyway because my mother called me a coward for not expressing interest and she was right. Your mother knows you want to ask me out? She confronted me about having feelings for you. Told me I should stop being too proud to admit it and actually ask instead of just assuming you'd say no. Dionne smiled. Your mother is very direct. She is. Is that a yes to dinner or are you deflecting because you're trying to figure out how to say no politely? It's a yes to dinner. I'm curious what you're like in contexts that aren't about your mother's care or about apologizing for calling me a tool. They had dinner at a restaurant in downtown Seattle, upscale but not ostentatious, chosen specifically because it was neutral ground where neither of them had professional associations. Tell me about you, Woohyuk said after they'd ordered. Beyond your nursing training and your exceptional patience with elderly stroke patients. Who is Dionne Morgan when she's not working? I'm from Atlanta originally. Moved to Seattle 5 years ago for a change of scenery after a difficult breakup. I love hiking and nature photography despite living in a city. I'm passionate about elder care because my grandmother had dementia and I watched her receive terrible care in a nursing facility that treated her like a burden instead of like a person. That experience made me want to provide better care to elderly patients. Is that why you're so patient with difficult patients? Because you saw what happens when caregivers aren't patient? Partially. But also because I genuinely like elderly people. They have life experience and wisdom that younger people often dismiss. Taking time to listen to their stories and to treat them with dignity isn't difficult for me, it's the part of my work I find most rewarding. My mother loves telling you stories about Korea. She says you actually listen instead of just tolerating her reminiscing. I do actually listen. Her stories are interesting. And listening makes her feel valued instead of like she's just boring her caregiver with repetitive memories. I should have listened when you tried to explain that to me. When you told me that emotional investment was important to good care, that maintaining complete distance would make you terrible caregiver. I dismissed that because I was too focused on maintaining professional boundaries. You were protecting your mother from getting hurt if I left. That's understandable motivation even if the execution was too harsh. Can I ask you something honestly? Sure. Do you resent me for calling you a tool? For treating you dismissively before I understood the value of what you were providing? Dionne thought about that carefully. I was hurt by it at the time. Being reduced to tool status when you're providing care with genuine compassion is painful. But I also understood that you were operating from business relationship framework that didn't account for the inherently personal nature of caregiving. You weren't trying to be cruel, you just didn't understand that care work can't be completely professionalized without losing what makes it valuable. I understand that now. Watching you with my mother, seeing the relationship you've built, recognizing that your emotional investment is what makes you exceptional, all of that taught me that I was fundamentally wrong about what good care requires. You learned. That matters more than whether you were initially wrong. They talked for 3 hours. The conversation ranged from Dionne's nursing philosophy to Woohyuk's complicated relationship with running a company he'd built from nothing but that increasingly felt empty and unfulfilling. I'm very good at business. I'm terrible at relationships, professional or personal. I optimize for efficiency and results rather than for human connection. That works well in tech industry, but it's made me someone who dismissed extraordinary care as just a job because I couldn't recognize value that wasn't measurable through professional metrics. What would you do if you weren't running Hoseo Innovations? If you could choose any career? I don't know. I've been building this company for 15 years. It's the only professional identity I have. But watching you work with my mother, seeing how fulfilled you are by work that's genuinely meaningful, I've realized that optimizing shareholder value isn't actually fulfilling even when it's profitable. You could transition. Build something meaningful instead of just something profitable. Like what? I don't know your skills well enough to suggest specifics. But you're brilliant at building systems and scaling operations. Those skills could be applied to social enterprises or nonprofits or anything that serves people instead of just generating wealth. That would require walking away from company I've spent 15 years building. Or restructuring it to serve different purposes. You don't have to abandon everything you've built. You just have to redirect it toward goals that actually provide meaning beyond just accumulating wealth. Woohyuk thought about that. You're suggesting I fundamentally transform my company's mission because you've inspired me to recognize that meaningful work matters more than profitable work? I'm suggesting you think about what would actually fulfill you long-term. Profitability is fine. But if it's not providing meaning, maybe it's worth exploring whether you could use your considerable skills and resources to build something that serves people instead of just serving shareholders. Over the following months, Woohyuk and Dionne dated seriously. He learned about her life beyond caregiving, her passion for nature photography, her volunteer work with elder care advocacy groups, her commitment to improving how society treats and values elderly people. She learned about him beyond the cold businessman persona he'd projected during her employment. His genuine devotion to his mother, his growing dissatisfaction with purely profit-driven business, his capacity for change when confronted with being fundamentally wrong about something important. You're different than I thought, Dionne told him one evening. They were at his house, which had become a shared space since Dionne spent significant time there with Mrs. Hoseo. When I was your employee, I thought you were just a businessman who couldn't see value beyond professional metrics. But you're capable of genuine depth and change when you're willing to examine yourself honestly. You made me examine myself. You proved that my framework for understanding professional relationships was inadequate for contexts that require emotional investment. That examination is making me better at everything, not just at understanding caregiving. How so? I'm restructuring Hoseo Innovations to focus on technology that serves social good instead of just technology that generates maximum profit. I'm building partnerships with nonprofits that serve elderly populations, using my company's resources to develop assistive technologies that improve quality of life for people with cognitive and mobility limitations. It's less immediately profitable than pure commercial development. But it's infinitely more meaningful. That's significant transformation. You inspired it. You showed me that work that serves people is more fulfilling than work that just optimizes financial returns. I'm trying to apply that lesson across my entire professional life. 18 months after their first date, Woohyuk proposed. They were at a hiking trail Dionne loved, Mount Rainier, where she'd taken some of her favorite nature photographs. Woohyuk had arranged for his mother to come along despite her mobility limitations, because both women were important to this moment. Dionne Morgan, you transformed my life in ways I never anticipated. You taught me that care and compassion matter more than professional efficiency, that emotional investment is valuable rather than problematic, that work that serves people is more meaningful than work that just generates wealth. You saved my mother's life when you didn't have to, proved you were a hero when I'd called you a tool. I love you. I want to spend my life with you, supporting you the way you've supported my mother, learning from you the way you've taught me to value what actually matters. Will you marry me? Yes. Absolutely yes. You've proven you're capable of genuine transformation, that you can recognize when you're wrong and actually change rather than just defending your position. That capacity for growth is rare and valuable, and I want to build a life with someone who has it. Mrs. Hoseo was crying. Happy tears this time, celebrating rather than grieving. Finally. I've been waiting for you to ask her for months. You're too slow, Woohyuk. I wanted to make sure I'd actually changed enough to deserve her before proposing. You'll never completely deserve her. She's too good. But you're trying to become worthy, and that's what matters. They married 6 months later, combining Woohyuk's Korean heritage with Dionne's African-American background, surrounded by friends and family who'd watched their relationship develop from employer-employee to something far more meaningful. 5 years after Dionne had taken a bullet saving Mrs. Hoseo's life, they'd built a family that proved words have consequences, but transformation is possible if people are willing to genuinely change. Woohyuk had restructured Hoseo Innovations into a social enterprise focused on assistive technology for elderly and disabled populations. The company was less profitable than it had been when purely commercial, but it was infinitely more meaningful and personally fulfilling. Dionne had expanded her elder care advocacy work, using resources from Woohyuk's company to fund programs that improved caregiver training and that promoted dignity-focused care for elderly patients. Mrs. Hoseo lived with them, surrounded by people who loved her genuinely rather than just provided professional care, recovering remarkably well from her stroke thanks to years of Dionne's dedicated support. Do you ever regret it? Woohyuk asked Dionne on their 5th anniversary. Taking that bullet? Getting shot protecting my mother when I'd told you that you were just a tool? Never. Your mother is family to me. Protecting family isn't something I regret even when it's costly. And that shooting led to transformation for both of us. You learned to value care and compassion. I learned that you were capable of genuine change when confronted with being wrong. Those lessons built the foundation for everything we have now. I regret calling you a tool every day. That's the most harmful thing I've ever said to another person. You learned from saying it. That's more important than the initial harm. Words have consequences, but they're not permanent if people are willing to change based on understanding those consequences. I'm grateful you were willing to give me a chance to change rather than just dismissing me as the asshole who called you a tool. I'm grateful you actually did the work to change rather than just apologizing without transformation. Apologies without change are empty. You proved yours was genuine. They'd proven that the most harmful words can become catalysts for transformation if people are willing to examine themselves honestly, that calling someone a tool doesn't determine the relationship's outcome if both people choose to build something better, that heroism and sacrifice can reveal character in ways that force re-evaluation of everything you thought you understood. The businessman who called his mother's caregiver just a tool. The nurse who proved she was a hero by taking a bullet protecting someone she cared about. Both of them building a life from that devastating moment, proving that words create consequences, but those consequences can lead to transformation rather than just permanent harm if people are willing to change. Words reveal how we value people. And sometimes, those words haunt us when we discover we were catastrophically wrong about who they are. Woohyuk Hoseo called Dionne Morgan just a tool. A person hired to perform functions, valuable for her utility but fundamentally interchangeable with any other competent professional. That assessment was brutally wrong. Dionne wasn't performing functions, she was providing genuine compassionate care that required emotional investment and that created real relationship with the patient she served. Woohyuk's error came from applying business relationship frameworks to work that's inherently personal. He thought professional boundaries meant emotional distance. He didn't understand that care work requires emotional investment to be effective, that maintaining complete distance makes caregivers terrible rather than professional. Dionne tried to explain that. She told him repeatedly that good caregiving requires caring genuinely, that patients need emotional support alongside physical care, that treating her like just a tool missed the fundamental nature of the work she was doing. He didn't listen. Until she took a bullet protecting his mother, proving with her sacrifice that she cared far more genuinely than any professional obligation required. That moment shattered his framework. He'd called her a tool. She'd proven herself a hero. The dissonance between his words and her actions forced complete reevaluation of everything he'd believed about professional relationships and value. Their story proves that words have power to harm but also power to catalyze transformation. Woohyuk's dismissive language hurt Dionne. But his recognition of being catastrophically wrong inspired genuine change, not just apologies, but fundamental restructuring of how he understood value and meaning. He didn't just apologize for calling her a tool. He transformed his entire life based on understanding why that language was wrong. Why care requires emotional investment, why meaningful work serves people rather than just generating profit, why relationships matter more than professional metrics. That transformation made relationship possible. Dionne didn't forgive him because he apologized, she forgave him because he proved through sustained change that he'd actually learned from being wrong. Most importantly, their story demonstrates that heroism reveals character in ways that force recognition. Dionne's sacrifice wasn't performed to prove anything. It was instinctive protection of someone she genuinely cared about. But that instinct revealed the depth of care Woohyuk had dismissed as mere professionalism. Sometimes it takes someone almost dying to make us recognize we've been catastrophically wrong about who they are and what they're worth. The businessman who thought care could be professionalized into emotional distance. The nurse who proved care requires genuine investment by sacrificing herself to protect someone she valued. Both of them building a life from that devastating moment when words met reality and reality proved the words were completely, catastrophically wrong. If you loved this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about words creating consequences, heroism forcing recognition, and transformation that happens when people genuinely change rather than just apologizing. Comment below, have you ever said something dismissive that you later regretted when you understood the full impact? Or been called just something when you were actually far more? Share your experiences. Thanks for watching, and remember, the words you use to describe people reveal how you value them. Choose carefully. The person you call just a tool might be the hero who saves someone you love, and you'll carry the weight of those words for the rest of your life. Until next time.